The spit hit my cheek before I even had a chance to finish saying hello. Warm. Sharp. The sound of her voice, shrill and venomous, cut through the calm of that perfect suburban afternoon. People like you don't belong here. In that moment, I didn't know whether to laugh, cry, or just walk away, but I remember thinking, if she only knew who I really was. I moved into the Ridgeway Estates community on a humid June afternoon, a place advertised as peaceful, tight-knit, family-oriented. The brochure had promised serenity, but what I found was something else entirely. The lawns looked cloned from some suburban fever dream, each blade of grass trimmed to military precision. The mailboxes stood identical, cream-colored soldiers guarding driveways where not a single oil stain dared exist. The sidewalks practically hummed with conformity, and somewhere in the distance, I could hear the rhythmic thwack, thwack, thwack of a tennis ball against a private court. I'd just closed on the house, cash deal, no mortgage, because after 15 years of developing properties in the city, I wanted quiet. I wanted a place where I could breathe, without dodging construction crews and city inspectors. I'd built homes for families who'd never had a chance to own anything. And now, finally, I wanted something for myself. The moving truck rumbled to a stop in my driveway, and as the crew started hauling boxes, I noticed her immediately. She stood at the edge of her lawn like a sentinel, blonde bob perfectly styled despite the oppressive heat, oversized sunglasses reflecting the afternoon sun. She wore a pastel pink polo shirt with an embroidered name tag that read, HOA President, Linda Carmichael. Her arms were crossed, her posture rigid, and even from 20 feet away, I could feel the weight of her judgment. The kind of woman who weaponizes rules like other people use kindness. I wiped the sweat from my forehead and walked over, determined to start things right. The smell of fresh-cut grass mixed with the tang of chlorine from her perfectly manicured pool next door. A small white dog, some designer breed I couldn't name, yapped at my ankles as I approached. "Hi there," I said, extending my hand with a genuine smile. "I'm Marcus. Just moved in next door. Looking forward to being part of the community." She looked at my hand like I'd offered her a dead fish. Then she did it. She leaned forward, pursed her lips, and spat directly onto my cheek. Time slowed. The warm saliva slid down my face as her words followed, cold and precise. "People like you don't belong here." I froze. My crew froze. Even her little dog seemed to stop barking. The world contracted to that single moment. The heat of humiliation spreading across my skin, the shock tightening my chest, the disbelief clouding my thoughts. She turned on her heel, muttering just loud enough for me to hear, "We have standards in this neighborhood. We worked hard to keep it a certain way." And then she was gone, disappearing into her pristine house, leaving me standing there with spit drying on my face and rage boiling in my veins. One of my movers, a young guy named Carlos, rushed over with a towel. "Man, did that just happen? You want me to call the cops?" I wiped my face slowly, deliberately, feeling every fiber of that towel against my skin. My hands trembled, but I forced my voice to stay calm. "No," I said. "Not yet." Because I had learned long ago that silence, in the right moment, could be more powerful than rage. The following days became a slow, creeping nightmare. The first violation letter appeared on my door the very next morning, before I'd even unpacked my kitchen. It was printed on official HOA letterhead, complete with a stamped seal and Linda Carmichael's looping signature at the bottom. Violation Notice. Verswand mailbox not HOA compliant. Must be cream-colored with brass numbering. See HOA Code, Section 4.2b, fine, 50-day, until corrected. I stared at my mailbox. It was black, perfectly functional, identical to the one at my last house. But apparently, in Ridgeway Estates, Even your mailbox had to conform. I replaced it that afternoon. The next letter came 2 days later. Violation notice. Terma 2 garage door, left open longer than permitted 3-minute window. See HOA code, section 7.8. A fine. $75. I'd been unloading furniture. My garage had been open for maybe 10 minutes. Then came notice number 3, improper lawn edging. Notice number 4, unapproved. Window treatment visible from street. Notice. Fadi for 3. Number 5. Vehicle parked in driveway overnight. Commercial. Lettering visible. My work truck. The one with my company logo, Rising Point Properties, that I'd parked in my own driveway. Every night, I'd hear whispers from neighbors as I walked past. Curtains would shift in windows. Conversations would stop mid-sentence. The hum of gossip followed me like mosquitoes, invisible but impossible to ignore. Once, I found a deep scratch keyed across the driver's side door of my truck, a jagged line that spelled out a single word: leave. Another time, a handwritten note appeared on my windshield. The letters pressed so hard into the paper they'd almost torn through. Sell your house before we make you regret it. Linda, Karen, as I started calling her in my head, was relentless. She weaponized every tool at her disposal. She called city inspectors to scrutinize my landscaping changes, claiming I'd planted non-native shrubs. She sent emails to the HOA board calling me disruptive and non-compliant. She filed a noise complaint when I hosted a quiet Saturday barbecue for my parents and sister. 5 people. Grilling burgers at 2 p.m., but I didn't fight back. Not yet, because I was there for more than a home. 3 months earlier, my firm had quietly finalized a massive acquisition deal with the city council. Ridgeway Estates sat on prime land, aging infrastructure, outdated utilities, a failing HOA drowning in debt. The city wanted redevelopment. My company had the resources and the vision. We'd purchase the entire property: streets, parks, common areas, even the underlying land beneath the homes themselves. Linda's power? It was temporary. Built on quicksand she didn't even know was shifting beneath her feet. Her kingdom? Constructed on property she didn't own and never would. Still, I played my part. The quiet, polite homeowner who smiled through every insult. I documented everything: the notes, the letters, the violation notices. I installed cameras around my property. I recorded her shouting from her porch, threatening other neighbors, pacing her yard like a warden surveying her prison. I was building my case, not for revenge, but for revelation. One evening, as I walked my dog past her house, I heard shouting, "That chair is not HOA approved. You have 24 hours to remove it, or I'm fining you $300. I slowed my pace, staying in the shadows. Linda stood on her porch, jabbing her finger at an elderly man across the street. Mr. Peterson, a retired teacher who'd lived there for 20 years. He stood in his driveway, shoulders slumped, staring at a simple wooden rocking chair on his porch. "Linda, please," he said quietly. "My wife gave me this chair before she passed. I just want to sit outside in the evenings. I don't care about your sob story," she snapped. "Rules are rules. Remove it or pay up." I watched Mr. Peterson shuffle back inside, defeated. And in that moment, I understood the full scope of her cruelty. She wasn't protecting the community. She was controlling it. She'd turned a neighborhood into a dictatorship, ruling through fear, fines, and humiliation. I started asking questions. Quietly. Over coffee with Mr. Peterson. During a chance encounter at the mailbox with Mrs. Chen, who'd been fined for hanging a bird feeder. At the community pool with the Johnsons, who'd been threatened for painting their shutters the wrong shade of blue. The stories poured out like water from a broken dam. Linda had fined retirees for unauthorized porch chairs. She'd blackmailed the HOA treasurer into silence about missing funds. She'd threatened to foreclose on families over violations as minor as parking at the wrong angle. She wasn't just a bully. She was a tyrant. And as I looked around at the frightened faces of my neighbors, good people, hardworking people, people who just wanted to live in peace, I made myself a quiet promise. When I was done, Linda Carmichael would never run another HOA again. When the city trucks rolled in, Linda thought it was a mistake. When the press showed up, she thought it was a setup. But when I stepped out of that black SUV in a tailored suit, smiling for the cameras, she finally realized the truth. The man she'd spat on was the one who now owned her entire neighborhood. 3 weeks earlier, I'd finalized the acquisition under my development company, Rising Point Properties. The paperwork had been processed quietly, signed in boardrooms far from Ridgeway's manicured lawns. The plan was comprehensive. Renovate the neighborhood's neglected infrastructure, modernize aging homes with energy-efficient upgrades, expand the community park, and, most importantly, dissolve the corrupt HOA once and for all. Corrupt HOA once and for all. But I didn't want to just announce it. I wanted Linda to see it unfold. I wanted her to feel the ground shift beneath her feet, the way I'd felt that spit slide down my cheek. The first move came subtly. I invited a few neighbors over for coffee. Those she'd fined, bullied, or threatened. Mr. Peterson came first, shuffling in with his cane and a look of cautious hope. Mrs. Chen arrived with homemade dumplings, though her hands shook as she set them on my kitchen table. The Johnsons brought their teenage daughter, who'd been harassed by Linda for skateboarding on the sidewalk. I laid out the documents on my dining room table. Property deeds, city approval stamps, development permits. Each page told the same story. Ridgeway Estates now belong to Rising Point Properties. And I was Rising Point. What does this mean? Mr. Peterson asked, squinting at the paperwork through thick glasses. It means, I said carefully, that Linda Carmichael no longer has power over this community. The HOA is being restructured under new management that actually serves the residents. And every violation notice, every unfair fine, every threat she's made, it ends now. The look of relief on their faces was pure redemption. Mrs. Chen started crying. Mr. Peterson gripped my hand so tightly I thought he might break it. The Johnson's daughter actually smiled. The first time I'd seen her do anything but stare at the ground. "Does she know?" Mrs. Chen whispered. "Not yet," I said. "But she will." Word spread quietly through the neighborhood like roots growing beneath concrete. The fear that once filled Ridgeway began shifting into something else. Solidarity. Unity. Hope. The same people who once avoided eye contact now waved when I passed. Neighbors started gathering in front yards again, sharing stories, laughter, and most importantly, truth. They formed a group chat, ironically called The Resistance, where they documented Linda's abuses and shared evidence. Together, we were building something stronger than any HOA bylaw, a real community. Then came the meeting. Linda had called an emergency HOA session to discuss what she described in her email as a new threat to the community's integrity. Her message dripped with paranoia. "It has come to my attention that certain residents are conspiring to undermine the HOA's authority. This meeting is mandatory. Failure to attend will result in fines." She had no idea what she was walking into. The meeting was held in the community center, a small, stuffy room with fluorescent lights and metal folding chairs. By the time I arrived, it was packed. Every seat filled, neighbors standing along the walls, some even peering in through the windows. And in the corner, I noticed something Linda hadn't: a local news crew. One of the neighbors had invited them, tipped them off about a story involving HOA corruption and racial harassment. Linda sat at the head table, flanked by the remaining HOA board members, two older men who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. She wore a red blazer, power dressing for battle, her lips pressed into a thin line of barely contained fury. When I walked in, the room went silent. She saw me and smirked, trying to pretend I wasn't a threat. "Nice of you to join us, Mr. Hayes. Though I don't recall you RSVPing," I didn't respond. Just walked calmly to the front, placed a leather folder on the table, and stood directly across from her. "Let's begin," Linda announced, banging her gavel. "As president of this HOA, I'm here to address the growing problem of non-compliance and disrespect for our community standards. Some residents," her eyes locked on mine, "seem to think rules don't apply to them." She launched into her usual tirade: property values, neighborhood character, the importance of maintaining standards. Her voice rose with each accusation, gesturing wildly as she painted me as the villain threatening their perfect suburban paradise. Then I opened the folder. "Actually, Linda," I said, my voice calm and clear, "I think we need to discuss a different topic. Ownership." I placed the first document on the table, the deed to Ridgeway Estates, stamped and certified by the city clerk. My name, my company. Official seals that couldn't be questioned. "As of 3 weeks ago," I continued, "this entire property, the streets, the community center, the park, all common areas, and the land beneath every home in this neighborhood belongs to Rising Point Properties, my development firm." The room erupted in gasps and murmurs. Linda's face drained of color, her smirk evaporating like morning dew. That's impossible," she stammered. "The HOA owns—" "The HOA owned nothing," I interrupted, placing another document down. "The original developer retained ownership of all common property when this neighborhood was built in 1987. That ownership transferred through several shell companies before the city acquired it last year due to unpaid taxes and code violations. The city then sold it to my firm as part of a redevelopment initiative." I let that sink in for a moment, watching her process the information, her mind racing through implications. "Which means," I continued, "the HOA exists at the pleasure of the property owner, me, and I'm restructuring it under new management. Management that actually serves residents instead of terrorizing them." Linda shot to her feet, her chair clattering backward. "This is illegal! I'll sue!" "You can't just—" "I can," I said calmly. "And I have every legal right. But let's talk about what's actually illegal, Linda." I pulled out my phone, connected it to the projector someone had helpfully set up, and pressed play. The screen filled with footage from my security cameras. Linda spitting on me that first day, her voice crystal clear. "People like you don't belong here." Then more clips. Linda screaming racial slurs at me from her porch. Linda threatening Mr. Peterson. Linda harassing Mrs. Chen. Linda falsifying violation notices, admitting to another board member that she was making examples of residents who didn't fit the neighborhood. The room fell into stunned silence. The news camera was rolling, the red light blinking steadily. "You want to talk about threats to this community?" I said, my voice rising now, fueled by 3 months of humiliation and rage. "Let's talk about harassment, discrimination, abuse of power. Let's talk about how you've terrorized retirees, targeted minorities, and embezzled HOA funds to pay for your pool renovations." That last part was new information, uncovered by the treasurer after I'd promised him legal protection. Linda's eyes went wide with panic. "You've violated fair housing laws, civil rights statutes, and probably a dozen financial regulations," I continued. "And every bit of it is documented, recorded, witnessed by dozens of people in this room." The board members beside her were already distancing themselves, literally scooting their chairs away. One of them, a man named Gerald, raised his hand shakily. I move for an emergency vote to remove Linda Carmichael as HOA president, effective immediately. Seconded, the other said instantly. All in favor? Gerald squeaked. Every hand in the room shot up, even Linda's own board members. Motion carries, Gerald announced, relief flooding his face. Linda tried to storm out, her face crimson, hands trembling with rage. But two police officers, there for security, invited by the city after we'd filed formal complaints, stepped forward. Ma'am, one said gently, we need you to stay. We have some questions about the harassment allegations. She whirled on me, eyes blazing. This is discrimination. Reverse racism. You're targeting me because you spat on me, I said quietly, stepping closer. Because you targeted me from day one because of the color of my skin. Because you've abused every ounce of power you were given, and you forgot that power can be taken away. The officer handed her a citation, formal charges for harassment and intimidation. With a court date already set, as she was escorted out, still sputtering threats and accusations, she turned back to me one last time. Her eyes were wide with fury and disbelief, searching my face for any hint of satisfaction or cruelty. But I didn't give her that. I just watched, my expression neutral, as the same neighbors she'd terrorized for years finally stood tall, some with tears in their eyes, others with hands clasped in silent gratitude. The door closed behind her, and the room exploded in applause. The next morning, the story went viral. HOA president fired after spitting on black homeowner who turned out to be the new developer. Local news. 7th racist HOA, Karen gets instant karma. When victim reveals he owns entire neighborhood. National headlines. Developer exposes HOA corruption after months of harassment. Real Estate Weekly, my phone wouldn't stop ringing. National media wanted interviews. Civil rights organizations offered support. Other HOA victims from across the country reached out, sharing their own stories of abuse. But the calls that mattered most came from my neighbors. The real ones, the ones who'd suffered in silence for years. Thank you, Mr. Peterson said when I answered his call. His voice cracked with emotion. I can finally sit in my chair again. Weeks later, Ridgeway Estates began its transformation. The new HOA board, elected by actual residents, not appointed by a tyrant, met monthly in transparent sessions open to everyone. Bylaws were rewritten to protect homeowners instead of controlling them. Reasonable rules about safety and maintenance remained. Petty restrictions about mailbox colors and porch furniture were abolished. Rising Point Properties began the infrastructure upgrades. New sewage lines, repaved streets, LED streetlights, fiber optic internet. We converted the old tennis court into a community garden where Mrs. Chen now grew vegetables for anyone who wanted them. The park got new playground equipment, accessible ramps, and a memorial bench dedicated to Mr. Peterson's late wife. Kids played in the streets again. Block parties returned. Neighbors waved instead of whispered. As for Linda, her house sold at a loss after sitting on the market for months. Turns out, being the subject of a viral racial harassment scandal doesn't help property values. She moved to another town 3 counties over, where, rumor has it, she tried to join their HOA board and was immediately rejected. I kept one of her violation letters, framed above my office desk in a simple black frame. Violation notice. For one mailbox not HOA compliant. A reminder that sometimes the best revenge isn't rage or retaliation. It's revelation. On a quiet Sunday afternoon, 6 months after I first moved in, I stood on my front porch with a cup of coffee, watching the neighborhood come alive. Mr. Peterson rocked gently in his chair, waving at passing joggers. The Johnson kids rode bikes with friends, laughing without fear. Mrs. Chen tended her garden while neighbors stopped to chat and share recipes. This was what I'd always envisioned when I bought this house. Not just a place to live, but a community to be part of. My phone buzzed with a text from Gerald, the former board member who'd called the vote to remove Linda. "Community potluck this Saturday at the park. You better show up. You're the guest of honor." I smiled and typed back, "Wouldn't miss it," because I'd learned something important through all of this. Justice isn't about humiliation. It's not about grinding your enemies into dust or making them suffer the way they made you suffer. Justice is about restoration. It's about taking broken systems and building something better. It's about using power not to control people but to liberate them. It's about remembering that when someone tries to diminish your humanity, the most powerful response isn't to diminish theirs, it's to uplift everyone around you. Linda had tried to make me feel small, unwelcome, less than. She'd used her tiny kingdom to wield cruelty like a weapon, convinced that her way was the only way, that people like me were threats to her perfect world. But the truth is, people like her are the real threat. Not to property values or neighborhood character, but to the basic dignity that every community should be built on. The best neighborhoods aren't built from property lines, HOA bylaws, or perfectly trimmed hedges. They're built from dignity, from respect, from the simple acknowledgement that everyone deserves a place to call home without fear of being targeted, harassed, or spit on for existing. As I sipped my coffee and watched the sun set over Ridgeway Estates, my neighborhood now, in every sense that mattered, I thought about that first day. The spit on my cheek, the humiliation, the rage I'd swallowed. And I realized if I'd responded with immediate anger, if I'd fought back on her terms, I might have won the battle, but lost the war. Instead, I'd played the long game. I documented, prepared, and waited for the perfect moment, not for revenge, for revelation, for the moment when truth could shine so brightly that no amount of hatred could dim it. My neighbor Carlos, the mover who'd handed me that towel on my first day, walked by with his own family now. They'd bought a house 2 streets over after hearing about the HOA changes. "Hey, Marcus," he called out. "Still the quietest revolution I've ever seen, man," I laughed. The best kind, because that's what it was, really. Not a dramatic confrontation or explosive takedown, but a quiet dismantling of a system built on fear, replaced with something built on trust. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Somewhere in the distance, I could hear music from someone's backyard, the sound of laughter carrying on the evening breeze. And, for the first time since I'd moved to Ridgeway Estates, I felt something I hadn't expected. Peace. Not just the absence of conflict, but the presence of genuine community. The kind where people looked out for each other, not because rules forced them to, but because they genuinely cared. I raised my coffee cup toward the neighborhood, a silent toast to every person who'd stood up when it mattered, who'd shared their stories, who'd believed that things could be better. "Welcome home, Marcus," I said to myself, smiling, and this time I meant it. Moral message: justice isn't about humiliation. It's about restoration. When power is used to divide, truth has a way of rebuilding what fear tried to destroy. Dignity isn't granted by those in power. It's inherent in every human being. And when systems are built to strip that dignity away, the most revolutionary act is not to destroy those systems with anger, but to transform them with truth. The strongest communities aren't built from conformity and control, but from the courage to stand up for what's right, even when it's uncomfortable, even when it takes time, even when you could walk away. Because at the end of the day, home isn't just a place, it's a feeling, and everyone deserves to feel safe, welcome, and valued in the place they call home, no matter what they look like, where they come from, or what their mailbox color happens to be.